Well, good morning. Okay, I'm sorry. I did not have a lot of sleep last night, so I'm going to need a little help from you. Good morning. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hey, welcome to the Sunday edition of Thursday Church. If you are online, we want to say welcome to you as well this morning. I don't know, it seems like this Down on the Farm series has been a phenomenal learning experience for me. And I hope that you have enjoyed it just as much as we have enjoyed putting it together for you. If you missed some things, in part one, we were reminded of the depth of the compassion of Christ through the way that he treated, of all things, a donkey and its mother. And then in part two, we were encouraged to learn God has a big plan for us. And the plan is that we would produce a huge harvest, and not just any old harvest. He wants us producing a harvest full of quality, delicious fruit. And then last week, we learned that Jesus wrecked an entire community's economy simply for the sake of one man. And this man, he wasn't popular. He wasn't powerful. He didn't bring a lot to the table. In fact, he was the man that everyone else would walk by and look at with disgust. And yet Jesus said, I will do this for you. And of all things, he used a group of pigs. So come on. This Down on the Farm stuff has been really good and just providing some valuable insight into spiritual truths. If you happen to miss one of those weeks, could I just encourage you, jump online, go to our website, www.thursdaychurch.org, click on the recent sermons, then click on the Down on the Farm icon and check out the service you missed. Because I'm going to tell you, you need to watch it. There's a lot of valuable stuff in there. Through this process of developing this series, I am going to tell you that I personally have developed a brand new appreciation for one of our farmyard friends that I'm going to tell you, I think gets a bad rap. This animal might be a little loud, maybe. Might be a little noisy at times. And maybe just a little obnoxious. But I also think that might be why this is becoming one of my favorite animals, I think. So, today, I want you to know that we are going to spend some time learning some really important lessons from the geese. Okay? Hang on tight. I know you're really excited. You see, before this series started, I think that I actually underestimated how fascinating these birds are. Geese are thought to have been, what's the word I'm looking for? Domesticated. They've been domesticated by humans over 3,000 years ago. And get this, they're thought to have been domesticated first in Egypt. So, now let your mind do some thinking here, okay? Over 3,000 years ago, geese, Egypt, which means that they were living and continue to live on the Mediterranean Sea. They call the Jordan River banks their home. Now start putting this together. I'm thinking, what if geese were actually part of the witnesses to Christ's arrival? Think about that, okay? And maybe if they weren't there that night in the stable, you know that when Jesus was ministering, a lot of his teaching happened around bodies of water. You know there had to have been a goose, or geese there at some point. And I think about that, and it just blows my mind that these animals that could have been part of that when he was doing his ministry are the very same animals that we today can learn something about. So, geese are considered one of the most intelligent birds. And they're considered intelligent because they've got these memories. They don't just remember faces. They have the ability to remember situations as well. Now, don't ask me because I have no idea how scientists have realized that geese can remember situations. I'm going to let them we're just going to believe that one. But all these facts that I've learned about geese, I think one of my favorite things is this. Geese, by nature, are social beings. They love being with other geese. So much so that they're considered an animal that flocks together. And flocking basically just means this. They do life together. These geese, they like to eat. They like to play, rest, and they even travel together. If you thought that loading the family up, shoving everything you own besides the kitchen sink in the car, and then taking off on a road trip to Florida was a long time together, think of this. Geese travel thousands of miles together on purpose every year. You see, these creatures remind us of the value of doing life together. You see, you and I were created to do life together, to live in community. And I know that because we were created in the image of a relational God. God created us to live in community and to share our lives with one another. Listen to what Luke says in chapter 4 of Acts as he talks about the early church. All the believers were united in heart and mind, and they felt that what they owned was not their own, so they shared everything they had. You see, we can really quickly miss the point. As we talk about this sharing everything they had, we can make it about material possessions, and that's true. As we do community together, we share our resources. But sharing life together in community goes far beyond just lending and borrowing something from someone else. Living life in community means sharing our lives together. It means that we willingly invite other people into not just our public lives that are easy to see, but we actually invite people into our private lives. You know, those areas we don't always like people to see. We invite people in to celebrate joys and good stuff with us. But sharing life also means that we invite people into the harder things, into the sadness, the disappointment, maybe even into our shame and our regret. Watching these geese flock together, doing life together, simply reminds us of an important lesson that God created us to do life together. You know, living in community, on paper, it sounds really nice. It sounds good. It sounds like a good idea. But see, here's where the rubber meets the road. Living in community is hard, and it requires something of every single one of us. It requires that we sacrifice. It requires that we commit ourselves to one another. And I'm not just talking about a commitment of saying we're loosely associated with a body of Christ. I'm talking about being committed to one another. It requires a loyalty to each other. Even when I don't always agree with you and you don't always agree with me, it means we're going to be responsible for one another. When I see you getting ready to walk into a bad situation, I'm going to say out of love and care for you, hey, watch out. And you're going to do the same for me. See, that's what living in real community as Christ intended looks like. And I think that's why the Bible is full of encouragements and instruction when it comes to this doing life together. Paul tells us in Philippians chapter 2 to agree wholeheartedly with each other, to love one another, and to work together with one mind and one purpose. Because you see, when we live in community with each other, when we do life together, there's actually a purpose to that. Did you know that when you see a flock of geese flying overhead, and they make this crazy V pattern in the sky, there's a purpose to that. There's a significant reason why they fly like this. It's because when a goose flaps its wings, its big, strong wings, which sometimes can span up to 3 feet long, that it creates a huge uplift in air, so that the goose following directly behind it can actually benefit from the work of that goose in front. Scientists have found that flying in this V formation can actually be 70% more effective than one goose doing it alone. But you know, there's always that one goose who wants to go and do it on its own because they don't need anybody, right? As soon as that goose chooses to leave the flock and try it on its own, instantly they feel the drag and the resistance caused by the wind and the air. But as soon as they get back into that V formation with their flock, they experience the benefit of being together and working for a common purpose. You know, one of the cool things about this flying pattern, that lead goose is the one that takes a lot of wear and tear, because it's the lead goose who's fighting against headwinds, who's fighting against resistance with no one helping it in front. And so oftentimes that poor little goose will get tired, and naturally, after a while, will gravitate toward the back to take a break and to enjoy the lift from the other geese. But hear this. Each goose takes its turn at the lead. Each goose takes its turn fighting off the headwind and the resistance, not for themselves. Because you see, if they were about themselves, they would be back in the back enjoying all the uplift. But they do it for the sake of the ones flying behind it. Church, let's think about this for a minute. If you want to talk about what sacrificial living looks like, it looks like doing something for someone else, not because they deserve it, because they've earned it. It's because you're sacrificing so that someone else can accomplish something. Remember I said, living in community, that's going to require some sacrifice from each one of us. So these geese, they teach us an important lesson, that doing life together has purpose. I want you to look at a passage with me this morning. It's found in Hebrews chapter 10. If you grab one of the Bibles in the room, you're going to look at page 1015. If you're online, grab your Bible. You want to see this for yourself. We're going to look at Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, and we're going to start at verse 24. Here we go. let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. You see, when this passage was written, the church was undergoing persecution. It wasn't daisies and roses for them. They were fighting hard to hold on to the faith of Jesus dying on the cross and being resurrected. And so, what normally happens when we find ourselves dealing with hardship and conflict and trial, if we're not careful, we will slide back in to our old way of doing things. We'll slide back in to those old habits, that old way of thinking. These early believers were no different than you and I. And what they were doing is they were sliding back and allowing a reliance on the Jewish customs and the traditions and the rules and the laws. And they were clinging to that rather than clinging to the resurrection of Jesus. You see, those laws, they weren't bad, but those laws were meant to direct us to the one that can save. This passage, it wasn't just written for the early church. They needed to be reminded of why it was important for them to gather together, to motivate and encourage one another. But church, today, we need the same. We are in the midst of a lot of uncertainty right now. I think one of the best ways to describe a lot of the things happening around us is unrest. Of course, now would be the time that we would need to pull together and say, keep going, keep fighting, keep watching out for your faith, because the world is going to tell us it doesn't matter. You see, our gathering together, it has significant value and purpose. And it doesn't matter if you're here online or in person. We need to be here. This time that we set aside on Sunday mornings at 10:45, it's important. This is the time, not just so that we can socialize and catch up on what happened this week. That's good, and I enjoy that. But our meeting together is so much more than that. This time together is for me to encourage you and for you to encourage me. Did you know that we all have a responsibility to one another? We have a responsibility to motivate and to encourage and to challenge one another to love and to good works. And so I have to ask, when's the last time? When's the last time you intentionally motivated someone else in their faith? When's the last time you encouraged someone? Keep going. I know the things in your life right now could wear you out, but keep believing, keep hoping. When's the last time you challenged someone in their faith? When you said, I see God doing something in you. Keep going. Don't be afraid. Keep pressing forward. Meeting together has purpose and value. You know, going back to our flying friends in the air, I'll admit, I don't always like the squawking and the honking and the noise that normally precedes me seeing geese in the air, especially in the morning. But I'm going to tell you, no longer am I going to be annoyed by that sound. And here's why. Because I've learned that that sound, just like that V formation, that sound is not accidental. It's not haphazard, and it's not just to disturb the people around them. That sound is a beautiful sound. It's the sound of the geese in the back encouraging the lead goose. Keep going. Maintain altitude. You've got this. Don't give up now. I know it's hard, but keep fighting. And as I've watched and I've read and I've studied the life of geese and what it looks like when they do life together, what it looks like when they work together for a purpose and they fly together and they encourage one another, it's provided a lot of valuable insight for me. And I marvel and I wonder, when the world looks at us, church, are they marveling? Are they looking at us and are they seeing a group of people who are sacrificially loving one another? Are they looking at us and are they seeing people, all different kinds of people, from different backgrounds, different life experiences, different personalities, working together for a common purpose and goal? Are they seeing that? You know, in John chapter 13, verse 35, we're told that it's our love for one another. It's our love for each other. It's not about how much we know about God. It's not about how religious we look in the workplace on Monday morning. It's not about saying the right thing at the right time. Our love for one another will prove to the world that we are Christ's disciples. Because see, when people look at a group of ordinary people loving and caring for one another in an extraordinary way, man, they can't help but see Christ. Because on our own, we can't love like that. I look around the room and I see a great group of people. I do. But we're not capable in our own strength, in our own wisdom, in our own goodness to be able to love and to care for one another as Christ intended. And so it brings up this idea that in order for us to truly live out our purpose as we live together, we've got to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. Did you know that when a goose becomes injured or ill during flight or travel, what happens is obviously that goose falls out of formation and tries to land. But the flock doesn't just leave that goose to do it alone. 2 other geese from the flock will leave the formation to follow that goose down. And then, after it lands and it's reached safety, they stay with it. They stay with that injured or ill goose. And they stay with it, tending to it until it recovers, until it's healthy and well again, or until nature takes its course. And then, when the goose is ready, they all fly off to find a new flock together, or the 2 geese leave their friend and they fly to find a new flock. You see, in order for me to care for you and for you to care for me, I've got to make sure that I'm guarding my heart, that I'm guarding my mind, that I'm guarding my faith so that I can care for you well. And you have the responsibility to do that so you can care for me well. You see how this works? See, for centuries, people have been using geese as guard animals. Did you know that? Because I didn't. People actually breed and sell geese as guard animals to guard homes, to guard farms. And this amazed me. You can actually buy some geese to guard your business. So if you're spending too much money on ADT or any of the other security companies, just consider this. You might want to think about a couple geese. Seriously, because geese have this protective instinct. They want to make sure that they are cared for as well as their flock and the ones they love and care for. So much so that if a goose feels threatened, it becomes very aggressive without apology. You know, earlier I mentioned that geese are considered to be intelligent because of their memories. Part of their intelligence is also based on their keen eyesight. They have the ability to see potentially harmful situations before they arise simply by watching. Okay? So, here is your practical application this morning. If you are ever in a situation where you are in a staring contest, a goose, it could happen. If you are, here's what you're supposed to do according to the professionals. Maintain eye contact. Hold your ground. Because geese, they might not smell fear, but they see fear. And if you tuck tail and turn and run, bad things happen. And if you don't believe me, I have proof. Watch this clip with me. Maybe. Do I need to do like a little song and dance? Bill, you want to come up here and we'll... It's feeling, yes. Oh, here we go. Wow. Talk about being at the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, when I told you that geese are always on guard, it's true. In the summer months, we might wonder why in Knox County we see all these geese everywhere annoying us with crossing the streets and hanging out in places that make it inconvenient for us. It's because during the summer months, geese go through a molting process where they lose their injured and damaged feathers and they get them replaced, but they also lose their flying feathers, which means during the summer, they are defenseless as far as flying. If you know that you're defenseless, your ability to get away from danger is taken from you, then you're going to be very intentional about what you do and how you do it. So they settle in places where they can find shelter and food and water. And it makes me wonder, are we as aware of ourselves as these geese are of their vulnerabilities? Are we aware of those areas that tend to trip us up? Not as a whole, but as individuals. Do I know the things that will cause me temptation? Do I know the things that will grab at my heart and pull me in a wrong direction? Am I aware that certain situations can cause me to stumble in my faith? Being aware of these potential pitfalls is part of this idea of protecting our hearts and our minds. We have to stay grounded. We have to stay grounded in our relationship with Christ, grounded in His Word, so that we're able to identify those things that are possible dangers, potential hazards for us, so that when they happen, we know what to do and we can rise above rather than getting tangled up in sin. You see, in Joshua chapter 1, verse 8, it says, study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night so that you will obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. You know, I know that clip was a little over the top. I know that. But I'm going to tell you, I sat and watched that clip in my office, and every time I laughed harder. And I just kept laughing at that poor woman being attacked. And I kept laughing until this thought crossed my mind. Am I as diligent about protecting my faith? Am I as diligent about guarding my heart and my mind as that goose is about protecting its nest? Or if we want to take it a step further, church, are we as diligent, are we as adamant about protecting the integrity, protecting the reputation of the body of Christ as that goose is in protecting a nest? And I fear that far too often we get a little bit lazy, we get a little bit lax, and instead of being proactive about guarding ourselves and one another, well, we become reactive and we just respond to stuff when it happens to us. And I think that's why Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5, stay alert. Stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, intentionally looking for someone to devour. Don't misunderstand. The enemy, he doesn't want to inconvenience you. He doesn't want to mess with your schedule. He doesn't want to make you have a bad day. No, the enemy wants to destroy your relationship with Christ. The enemy, he wants to destroy your marriage, to rip your family apart. So when we get this warning to stay alert, stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Stay on guard. You know, as I think about everything that I have been able to learn about Geese, which is more than I ever dreamed, but as I think about this amazing Creator who loves us so much, who so wants us to understand his plan and his purpose for us as people and the church, that he's willing to use nature to show us lessons so that we understand them, so that we can visualize what this means. When I get that he loves me so much that he's willing to do this, well, then my response back to him is simply just to do what he asked me to do. When he says, let me show you what I have for you, let me show you how good it can be, our response is to simply obey. So when he says, love one another sacrificially, he means do it. When he says, work together, with a common purpose and one mind. He means do it. And when he says protect yourself, because the enemy doesn't want our relationship to be good, he means do it. Church, I know it seems goofy that of all things in the world that he would use to help drive these points home would be a goose. But if it takes a goose to teach us, I'm okay with that. He loves us so much that he will use absolutely anything and everything to help us understand him